May 27th, Louis Zamperini.
Hate leads to death. If you want to live, forgive. World War II hero Louis Zamperini drifted through life, even after he was rescued from 47 days in a lifeboat lost at sea. As a B-24 bombardier, he had flown many missions and completed them under fire. On May 27, 1943, Zamperini and his crew were flying a search and rescue mission over the Pacific Ocean. With 11 men on board, 2 engines lost power, and the plane took a nosedive into the sea. Only 3 survived the plunge: Zamperini, pilot Russell Phillips, and tail gunner Francis McNamara. McNamara survived 33 days, but somehow Zamperini and Phillips managed to hang on longer. They drank rainwater collected in their raft and devoured whatever birds or fish they could capture. Sharks encircled the raft in search of blood. Shockingly, the men's weight plummeted to under 100 pounds. One day, a low-flying gunner riddled the ocean with bullets, barely missing Zamperini and Phillips. In desperation, Zamperini promised God that if his life was spared, he would seek him. He was bargaining with God, but didn't yet know what he was bargaining for. The men drifted 2,000 miles and were somewhere between Hawaii and the Philippines. Finally, a boat patrol approached, but it was Japanese. They hoisted Zamperini and Phillips into the boat and shipped them to a prison on the mainland. Prison was brutal. Zamperini was singled out for extra abuse because he had been a U.S. distance runner and a popular Olympic hopeful. One man named Matsuhiro Watanabe used clubs, belts, and even his own fists to beat Zamperini mercilessly. He developed murderous thoughts toward Matsuhiro and filled his mind with hate. After the war, Zamperini came back to a peace and hero's welcome, but war still raged in his heart. He drank and lived recklessly, and there were nightmares, horrible nightmares, that wouldn't go away. One night, he woke and found himself strangling his beautiful wife, Cynthia. He had thought he was strangling Matsuhiro. Something had to change, and it did. It wasn't long before Cynthia told him she wanted a divorce. Concerned neighbors invited the couple to a Billy Graham crusade in Los Angeles. Cynthia attended and received Christ into her heart. Afterwards, she told Louis she no longer wanted a divorce, and she convinced Louis to attend with her. The first night, he stormed out. Incredibly, he agreed to return the next night and nearly left. But then something stopped him. He thought about how God had saved his life. He remembered his promise on that life raft, and a review of his godless years played itself out. He knew he needed Christ, so he turned right around and went back to the prayer room. He later explained, "I dropped to my knees and for the first time in my life, truly humbled myself before the Lord. I asked him to forgive me for not having kept the promises I had made during the war and for my sinful life. I made no excuses. I did not rationalize. I did not blame. God had said, 'Whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved.' So I took him at his word, begged for his pardon, and asked Jesus to come into my life." Romans chapter 10, verse 13. Louis' marriage was restored, and the murderous thoughts he had were lifted. He wrote Matsuhiro a letter telling him he had forgiven him. He even traveled to Japan to face his prison guards, now imprisoned themselves as war criminals, and he forgave them. Louis Zamperini was a new man in Christ, finally able to forgive his captors and experience true joy in the Lord. Who is God asking you to forgive? Now, will you take that step? Hate leads to death. If you want to live, forgive.
Men, Chuck Stecker here. I'm the teaching pastor at Summit Church in Centennial, Colorado. I am also the executive director of a ministry called A Chosen Generation. You know, as I read this story today for multiple times on Louis Zamperini, you know, today is May 27th. As we're looking at this, here's the things that struck me, and maybe it's just me. In a time of desperation, Louis Zamperini bargained with God, made a bargain with God. If you'll get me out of this, then I will do this. Caused me to think back in my own life, the number of times that I had, in desperation, bargained with God. I've dealt with alcohol, other issues in my life. But I had to look back like Louis Zamperini and say, how many of those times did I bargain with God and he held up his end of the bargain and I didn't hold up mine? Maybe that's a question for you today. Have you bargained with God to give you something, to take something away, to rescue you, to restore something? I don't know what it is in your life. I know the things that were in my life. But have you bargained with God in the past? God has held up his end of the bargain. Oh, he's a faithful God, and he's a God that we can trust. But in looking back, in God's faithfulness, have you been less faithful? In the life that you're living, that you promised, that you stated, this is what I want to do. This is the man I want to be. Guys, I want to tell you, it's not too late. It's not. You can start today and be the man that God created you to be, but the man at times you promised God you wanted to be and that you would be. Is today the day you say, God, thank you for what you've done, and I want to uphold my end of the bargain now. God bless you, man. Have a great day.